Director of Development for LGBTQ Initiatives at the University. Thank you. Tonight's event is a very special and we're very privileged and honored to have Dr. Russell giving this public lecture at one of the top 30 LGBT schools in the country. Does anybody know that best colleges, best colleges.com, just named the University of Arizona, one of the top 30 schools for LGBTQ issues. So, and that's because of all of you. There's also some really important people who helped put this event on tonight, and I would like to thank each and every one. I'll run through a list of names, and then at the end we'll do a big, huge round of applause, all right? So first I want to thank the McClelland Institute for Children and Families, the LGBTQ Affairs, the Office of LGBTQ Affairs, the Institute for LGBT Studies, the Alliance Fund, the Fund for Civility, Respect, and Understanding, PBRAG, EON, Southern Arizona Police Foundation, as well as Chinese Jazz. Thank you all of you for coming. And now it is my privilege to introduce Chris Sogi, the Graduate Assistant for LGBTQ Affairs.
So if you haven't signed up yet on our session, you can have one outside. Please just get a chance to do that. It's kind of how we get funding to do amazing programming like this. So keep an eye on it on your way out after that. And so I want to say thank you everyone for coming to this talk. And you can see on the board it's a part of our Coming Out Week 2014 programming. There's some other fun events that are coming up that I want to highlight. That includes tomorrow from 6 to 8 p.m. at the Campus Christian Center. There's a conversation about marriage equality and people working with Why Marriage Matters and awesome witness group. Check that out. And then after that, on Thursday from 5 to 7:30 p.m., there's a streaming of the Normal Heart, which covers HIV/AIDS activism, followed by a contact by LGBTQ affairs faculty fellow Dr. Norton. It is in the gallery. And so because we're all family, I want to introduce our speaker for this evening a little bit. Dr. Stephen Russell is the interim director of the Norton School of Education and Sciences, as well as other titles and activities that are up on the board. I could go on and on about his awards and what a big deal he is, but I'll leave specifically amazing work about adolescents. So as a former adolescent, I really appreciate his research as other people. He was the winner of our Fabulous Faculty Award in 2012, and some of the laudations that he received for that include that as a professor, he was awesome since day one. As a researcher, he is fabulous and passionate, and is an amazing colleague who cares so much about the lives of young people. He's someone who lives the work that he does, and is super busy, but always makes himself available, including personally emailing President Hart to make sure he's on that one. So everyone, please help me welcome Dr. Russell and find out his research.
Thank you, Chris. Thanks, Chris. Can you hear me? I wonder if I need the mic, because I'm like I do need the mic. Yes, ma'am. Okay. Thank you. This is so fun, and I was going to thank all the sponsors too, but I can say, thanks to all of you. So maybe I'll be quick about that. It's fun. It's great to see all the folks that I know from so many walks of Tucson life, and my colleagues and my students and postdocs and friends from the Alliance Fund in Tucson, and it's really great. And so happy Coming Out Week. Yay! What could be more fun than Coming Out Week? And so it's nice, it's fun for me to be invited to have this conversation with LGBT affairs and the student groups about what could we do for Coming Out Week that would remind us and remind students on this campus that the text of their lives is the text of the academy, and that we can actually be scholars and think deeply about our own lives, and that there's a lot of never subtly kind of stuff that's related to studying LGBT lives. So I'm excited about that. And I've been thinking a lot. I prepared a talk a year ago that has inspired me since to try to share with you some of the conundrum that I've been grappling with for the last maybe 5 or 10 years in terms of research that has practice and policy implications for understanding the well-being of LGBTQ young people. Some of the research is not exactly but some of the findings of research aren't exactly what we might think they would be, and I've been kind of struggling with that, and so I'm going to share that with you today. And I'll disclose at the beginning that I'm a data collector. And so I'm a real data geek, and my students in my research team always roll their eyes when I come back with a new data set, and I'm like, look, we have new data. So I'm going to draw from a bunch of different kinds of studies. They're mostly survey research. I was trained as a demographer and sociologist, but I also do other kinds of work too. So it's mostly going to be survey kinds of research, but you'll see other kinds of data. And a lot of it's mine, but it's also from other people too, so I'll give that up front. Maybe before I'll go on too, I will say, because I got the most wonderful phone message today from one of the best friends, closest friends, come on in, have a seat, of Frances McClelland. Frances McClelland was, how many people in the room besides her, in addition to her old best friend, knew Frances McClelland? Because there are fewer people now in Tucson knew and remembered her, but she was a businesswoman, a philanthropist, and an agent of change through her own generosity. And so it's great to see Prill here and to honor Frances's legacy. She was really committed to changing the stakes for children and families in southern Arizona. So we're really proud to be a partner in all of this in Tucson. So thanks. So, but before another, you might have heard of some of this. This just came out from our colleagues in the Crossroads Collaborative. Shout out to Adela Licona and the Ford Foundation for supporting the Crossroads Collaborative. These research briefs just came out from GSA Network last week, and so I don't know if you saw on Huffington Post or EdSource or EdWeek, but this issue of the school-to-prison pipeline for LGBTQ young people has gotten a lot of attention, and this came out of our research, our collaborative research. And so these are some new research briefs published by GSA Network, but with the Crossroads Collaborative, which is Adela and me and other folks here at the University of Arizona. So we're really proud of this work that's getting some national press about the ways that LGBTQ young people are overrepresented in the school pushout, and that's the next talk or something. Will be about why that's happening and what we can do about it. But we're working on that. And I will just do a plug for yet another event next Wednesday night at the YWCA, where we're going to be talking about some other work. We're going to be debuting a film. October is Let's Talk Month for Let's Talk About Sex. Hey, and so I hope that you're all having conversations about sex and sexuality with the young people and the old people in your lives that you care about this month and every month. But next Wednesday, we're going to be debuting a 3-minute film that was created by Tucson Youth as part of the Crossroads Collaborative. And we're doing that in partnership with Planned Parenthood of Southern Arizona. It's going to be, it's great. So you got to see it. So be there next Wednesday. Okay. But let's come back to Coming Out Week and the issue of coming out, because it's something that I've been thinking about. And so back up, just to give you a little bit of context about how I've been thinking about this in terms of for us to think about what's the situation for contemporary LGBTQ young people, and what's the deal with coming out, like why should we still care? And the motivation for posing the question this way is that it's the question that I get from reporters, and mostly, and maybe sometimes students, is like, well, why is there all this attention to bullying? Like, isn't marriage done? Like, aren't we finished? Like, isn't it all happening? And like, if you would just, like in the last week, we can't even keep up with the pace of social change, right? I mean, it's like just all happening. And so people say to me, if things are so much better, how come there's all this attention to bullying? Why should we still care about that? Is that like, what's the big deal? And frankly, I've been thinking about that for quite some time. So what is the situation for contemporary young people around coming out? Well, I'm going to show you a slide of a summary of research studies for everything I could get my hands on, really. There's not a huge literature on this. And this is age, so 12-year-olds to 20-year-olds. And this is starting at 1970 to moving forward. And there are a number of studies that show that the age of coming out has basically, that first of all, societal attitudes have obviously changed. And so I've already said that in the last week, like, holy wow, that there's been so much dramatic social change. And so if you think of the pink, is that pink? If you think of the pink as like sort of a growing social acceptance and understanding, societal attitudes are getting pinker or whatever, getting more supportive and affirming of LGBTQ lives, right? What we know about coming out is that starting even before 1979, but in some of the first studies of youth, I'm just showing you studies of youth. And if we go back, there were some studies like from the 1940s that showed people, the average age of coming out at that time, disclosure, understanding oneself as LGBT was, like in the 30s. So if you start way up, like up here, can you see that above the screen? Like way up here, like up in the ceiling. But I think it's kind of self-evident. The LA Times called me 10 years ago and said, are young people coming out at younger ages? Is that true, Dr. Russell? And I was like, well, there is no data for that, but we know it's true because you're asking the question. Because when I was in high school, there weren't gay kids in high school. I mean, of course there were gay kids in high school, but we didn't, none of us knew each other to be gay kids when we were in high school. And I'm not that old, but I'm pretty old. And it's a totally different world now. There's no such thing as not having a gay or LGBTQ young person in a high school these days. And I will point out that this is brand new, unpublished data from our study that's happening here in Tucson. That was from the first wave of the study collected just 2 years ago now this fall. We're in the fourth wave of that study. We're just beginning to understand, so we're just beginning to actually use the data for what it was intended for. It's been 4 years of adventure collecting data. So stay tuned on that. But you basically see this pattern of that has led to this paradox that people ask me about, which is like, well, look how much better things are. And look at this dramatic, kids are coming out younger and younger and things are so much better. And shouldn't it just be like hunky-dory, happy town for the folks, for LGBTQ young people today? And I do think, and so what's that about? And I would point out, these are the first, I used to say contemporary youth, and now I have to say 10 years ago because I've been doing it, it's been that long. But these were the young people, a decade ago or 15 years ago, were the very first young people to come out as teenagers. I mean, that's a little bit of an exaggeration, but as a cohort. And so they were the first people who had, it was the first time culturally that we had parents, ministers, teachers, rabbis, that were confronting LGBTQ young people in their classrooms, in their homes, in their faith communities. That has even changed in the last 10 years too, but it was the first, there's been a dramatic change in the last 10 years in terms of the adult world understanding LGBT, even knowing that and understanding that there are LGBTQ young people. I mean, people used to say, people still do say in some places, oh, we don't have that problem. There aren't any gay kids at our school. And, everybody in this room probably, because you're here, just like, yeah, whatever, you just don't know who they are. And so this is the question then. If it's so much better, why might it be so much worse? Why are we seeing so much more in the media? Is it just because we're seeing stuff that was there all along? And so it's pretty clear that LGBTQ young people are coming out at younger ages, and there's been this dramatic change in social acceptance. But at the same time, there's been this unprecedented concern for bullying, for safety, for homophobia in schools, but also in communities. And so this is this paradox, if things are so much better, why is there so much attention to the risk? And frankly, some of the results that I've had some of the research results that we've had in terms of trying to understand risk and resilience and well-being for LGBTQ kids have been, frankly, a little bit troubling and inconsistent with what our theories might have suggested, or maybe I should amend that, our assumptions would have suggested about what makes LGBTQ young people happy and healthy. And so it's that conundrum that I've been trying to confront and that I'm going to share with you a little bit about today. What else is going on so let's, what do we, and then the final part of this, the other half of this presentation, and I'm going to do this as quickly as I can because there's going to be a reception in the lobby, which is going to be really great, is what do we actually do about it? And we're actually, learning about what we can do about it. And in fact, a lot of what we're doing in my research lab now is really trying to understand policies and programs and practices that can make a difference for creating better environments for all young people. So to make the case for sort of why we should care, just this really quick, and some of you have seen this before, I presented this at a campus-wide event last year, but this is data from a huge survey of California school children that's asked about bullying, and what this shows is that 37%, or just over a third of students report that they've been bullied. And actually, by the way, bullying is a little bit lower in California than other places in the country. Typically, it's more than 40% of kids say that they've had some form of bullying. But in the California Healthy Kids Survey, they followed up asking what was the motivation for the bullying? Why were you bullied? If you were bullied, was it because of your race, ethnicity, or national origin, your religion, your gender, your actual or perceived sexual orientation, your physical and mental disability? I'll quickly point out that we didn't. They weren't actually asked that. What they were asked was because you were gay or lesbian or someone thought you were. They didn't ask teenagers actual or perceived sexual orientation, just in case you're wondering how they actually worded the question. Not that some teenagers would know that, right? Many teenagers might. And the point here is just to say, look, oh my gosh, 40% of young people, almost 40% of young people say that they've been bullied. 30% of young people say that they've been bullied for something that's due to bias. I mean, it's like 75% of bullying has a discriminatory basis to it, at least in the state of California. And this is really important in the child development world because there is a whole world, this is like a tangent that makes me crazy, of bullying researchers who study bullying, who study aggression, who study dyadic relationships, who study forms of bullying, whether it's physical or verbal or social or cyber. And until recently, almost none of that work has paid attention to the motive behind the bullying. And by the way, 75% of the motive might be discriminatory. It is discriminatory, at least from the perspective of young people in California. But wait, there's more. The important thing is that it's associated with all the things that we want to prevent in the lives of kids. So this is a health risk behavior survey, the California Healthy Kids. And I'm going to show you some things that we care about, like grades, like low grades, grades below, having a grades below C. And I want you to look at I'm being recorded over here, so I need to do this. I want you to look at the young people who are not bullied, the young people who are not bullied, who are bullied but don't report any bias. I think of this as, and I used this in the undergraduate class and not one person understood what I meant, but I think of it as the Leave It to Beaver sort of lunchroom bully. There's a whole generation that doesn't get that reference, but Leave It to Beaver was a television show where there was Eddie, wasn't Eddie the one, or anyway, Eddie Haskell. See, Eddie Haskell was sort of a bully, right? And I don't remember if he actually took somebody's lunch money, but at any rate, these are the bullied but not due to bias, and then these are the categories of bullying due to bias. And you see, at least for low grades, for young people that say that they were bullied because they're gay or lesbian or someone thought they were, or because of a disability, are about 10% more, 10% more of them report having low grades. Now, this is a study of 230,000 young people, so everything is statistically significant. Whether these are statistically meaningful differences, I think this is an important difference. We're talking about the difference between like 17 and 22% having low grades. That seems meaningful and something we should pay attention to. But if we move from academics to health behavior, the disparity starts to look really disturbing. We're looking at the percentage of kids who report binge drinking, missing school because they feel unsafe, and here, start looking at how different or not these two bars are, right? The real difference here has to do with discriminatory bullying. Being threatened with a weapon at school, and being depressed, reporting depression. And are there chairs? There's a chair here, and we could put this over. Come in. Do not hesitate.
Raise your hand if there's an open chair by you.
Yeah, but probably nobody wants to sit there. There's one here, and there's some over here. So the point to me, the point is, if we're talking about bullying and we're not talking about discrimination and bias, we have a serious problem, because in the studies of bullying and the effects of bullying are completely masking the dramatic differences that have to do with discriminatory bullying. Bullying due to something about yourself that you can't change, right? And I don't mean to say that bullying is not bad, that non-discriminatory bullying is not so bad, but the difference is dramatic when it includes a discriminatory or prejudicial basis to it, right? And so what's happening, if we look developmentally, we can see clear patterns in bullying. This is just regular old bullying, because in Arizona we don't ask about discriminatory bullying, by the way. But if you look at the Arizona Youth Survey from 2010, this is 62,000 students from the state of Arizona, and you see this basic, are people familiar with the MSIH hypothesis, which is the middle school is hell hypothesis? Just a little joke. This is the confirmation of what we all knew, which is middle school is hell. And that we see in study after study, we see we call them developmental trends related to bullying, meaning age-related trends, where bullying peaks in middle school. We don't have it for comparable data for elementary school ages in Arizona. But we see that there's a big change, that middle school is hell for some young people, but that bullying persists for some folks all the way through high school. And if you look at these numbers, this is sort of non-trivial if we think about some young folks in Arizona that are graduating from high school having experienced chronic bullying, probably for a number of years, some of whom are here at our campus, right? And how are we understanding that and incorporating that into our understanding of their lives? And there's some brand new data that I'll share with you. The data come from a study, a longitudinal cohort study in England, but that's the first study to follow prospectively people from the early teenage years from early teenage into 20s. And what this chart is just quickly showing you is this same trend, the same downward trend in rates of reported bullying. So we see that bullying that young people do develop other strategies to, people are less likely to bully as they get older. Whether it means they become nicer is another debate, right? But people develop a more sophisticated and other kinds of strategies for dealing with interpersonal challenges. We might call it maturity. I'm always afraid of words like that because I don't want to, say something that is anti-middle schoolers, except for calling middle school hell. I'm talking middle school is hell, not middle school young people are not themselves. But clearly there's this age-related trend, but the important thing also about these data is that it shows that this disparity between the lesbian, bisexual, gay, and bisexual young men and women that is present when they're 13 and 14 is still present when they're almost 20. So even though bullying itself declines over time, in terms of by age, there's still a persistent disparity that has to do with homophobia and discrimination across time, and that we see through the high school years. So the disparity persists. So what's going on with that, and what does all of this mean for the age of coming out? What I would suggest, if we go back to this kind of this visual image of sort of like changing social attitudes, which are getting so much better, the growing pink, and then this like decreasing age over time of the average age of coming out in cohorts of LGBTQ young people. If we overlay that with peer attitudes, where really this age about 13 and 14 seems to be the critical hotspot around social interaction and behavior. And there's a whole child development literature, and some of my friends are in the room, so I have to be a little bit careful because they know this better than I do. But the child development literature on the development of, for example, in-group and out-group relationship and attitudes. And again, we don't ask, in our society yet, we have not asked elementary school age children about their attitudes about homosexuality. We just don't do that yet. So I can't really tell you for sure that there would be negative attitudes about homosexuality among third graders, but let's guess, right, what that could look like. But most of the developmental literature suggests that in-group, out-group attitudes, the social regulation around them, the sensitivity to that peaks at about age 13. Heterosexual youth report stronger prejudice and engage in more frequent homophobic behavior at younger ages. And there are a number of explanations. Some of them are cognitive. Even there are the folks that are the making neuro arguments about this, that our cognitive processes might allow young people, older adolescents, to make more sophisticated judgments about tolerance and difference than younger adolescents. Others would say it doesn't have to do with the cognitive development. It has to do with social transitions in the way that we structure schools in this country, and the fact that we have a transition to middle school right at this critical time when there's a heightened awareness of peer group. So there are multiple. What my point is, I don't want to come down on any specific explanation because at some fundamental level, as a person who cares about policy and creating change, I really don't care. I really don't care where it comes from, although my developmental colleagues will be horrified by that, because of course we should care to understand the origin. I mean, I do care. Scientifically, I care. Melissa Curran cares. But I'm saying sort of practically, I don't really care where it comes from. Is it cognitive? Okay, maybe. Is it social? Okay, maybe. Is it neurological? Okay, maybe. But whatever. This is the pattern that we see in the United States. It's a pattern that's consistent in other cultures right now. And so if it's developmental, if it's related to age, what we're seeing is that there's this perfect, well, maybe not a perfect, but there's this collision between social attitudes, between the lower ages of coming out, and the capacity of young people to understand, respect, and incorporate tolerance and diversity into their social world, into their everyday interactions. So that's a challenge. Like, okay, now what? Like, that's not a good solution, Dr. Russell. If what you're saying is that, like, this is a challenge. So when people say, like, isn't it so much better? I say, well, actually, coming out at 20, when you've when you've done a lot of other adolescent developmental work that just is work, when you maybe have different kinds of social regulation, interpersonal regulation, family relationship sophistication, that's just really different at 20 than when you're 13, right? And we all know this. And those of us who are the older LGBTQ people in the room, like, just imagine, what it would have been like to have deeply known yourself at 12 and to have shared that with your parents, and what a little jerk you would have been about it, right? Just so we can imagine that these are critical. I do think that this is a critical cultural collision that we're in the middle of, that we need to unpack. So, are you with me so far on that? That's where I think we are. That's why I think I'm not actually a doom and gloom kind of person, but I actually do think that it matters, that the pace of social change has been dramatic, and that it is actually not easier for LGBTQ young people today. It's different. I'm not saying it's worse, but I'm saying if you look at this, we've got some pretty compelling data that we need to pay attention to. So I've been thinking about this in a couple of ways, because I'm in family studies. I've been thinking about the role of parents. I've been thinking about the role of community-based organizations to support LGBT young people. I'm doing sort of okay on time. So let me start with the role of parents, because as a family studies person, what we know is that to back up a little bit to say the early research on coming out was a lot of it focused on the relationship between LGBT young people and their parents. And that research was pretty clear that coming out to parents is reported as the single most stressful event in the lives of LGBTQ young people. That, again, this is changing, and the flavor of it is changing, because people who are parents are changing culturally, but still, young people report that as one of the most stressful things. Early studies of coming out showed that coming out and disclosure was associated with a number of negative kinds of life events, and in fact, some of the research on suicide, for example, suggests that the highest period of risk is is immediately following disclosure to parents, to family members, and of course their reaction to it. And so there's a heightened risk for health and behavioral risk around the time of coming out. At least that's true historically in the literature, and it'll be interesting to see if that remains true for contemporary young people, like the young people that we've been following here in Tucson for the last couple of years. But when we look at the role of parents, this is data from another large study in Dane County from a colleague, Paul Poteet. What he found in this large study, he was trying to understand suicide risk and the potential for LGBT young people and the role of parents as a buffer. Having strong parent support buffer LGBTQ young people from a risk for suicide. What he found in general was that parent support in and of itself is associated with lower suicide risk and greater school belonging. So it's good. There's a direct effect, like good parents are good, right? Like having good parents is a really good thing, right? We sort of knew that. But what he was hoping was that having supportive parents would buffer the associations between LGBT-related issues like stress and suicide and depression. But what he found was that parent support only buffered the effect of homophobic victimization. He looked at whether you were bullied because you were gay or lesbian or not. That parent support buffered that, the effect, the connection between victimization and suicide, only for the straight kids. And it buffered it, and it weakly buffered its effect on school belonging, but only for the straight kids, and there was no significant difference for the LGBTQ kids. So in other words, if you had a supportive parent, it didn't really matter. If you were bullied at school, if you were victimized at school, the link with suicide was strong and persistent, and the degree of your parent support was not a moderator. This is not the news that we wanted to hear, right? In family studies, we believe that parents are going to matter, right? I mean, of course, parents matter. They have a baseline matter, but they aren't. And so one of the reasons we think this, I mean, some of the explanations for this are pretty clear. We think that probably straight kids are more likely to disclose their homophobic victimization. Because if you're straight, you can go home to your parents and say, these kids are beating me up, they're calling me a fag, but I'm not really one, right? Or whatever, and that they might actually be able to seek social support from their parents in ways that an LGBT kid who may be closeted in Dane County in 2011 might not have done, for example. There are a bunch of other kinds of processes that may be at play here, but it seems likely that straight kids might be able to access social resources from their parents around homophobia in a way that maybe LGBT kids can't. That's my best explanation for this unhappy finding. But then we see, and so this is just a little bit more of the bad news. From the Family Acceptance Project, Caitlin Ryan was here a couple of years ago on campus and spoke, and we've been collaborating for a while. And she's shown really strongly in some of these articles that are cited here, and I can, of course, share more of this with you if you're interested, that family rejection has a strong link with compromised well-being for LGBTQ young people, and that family acceptance is associated with positive well-being, so that we know when parents of LGBT kids act in ways that are supportive and affirming of their LGBT-ness, they do better. If they act in ways that are rejecting, they do worse. But what we have found in this study is that family acceptance doesn't moderate the link between stress and well-being. And this is the bad news, right? I was hoping that, in other words, family stress would be a buffer, would stop, would like intervene, and would say, if you have lots of stress, notwithstanding your other bad things in your life, like being victimized at school, you would do okay, that it would be a buffer against that victimization. I put this little note here just for some of you who are, statistical geeks, because I want you to know that family acceptance and rejection are not the opposites of each other. They're only correlated at about at 0.34, which is about a third. So they only share about a third of the variance with one another, which means that families are doing both at the same time. There are families that are engaging in behaviors and strategies that are accepting and rejecting at the same time. And in fact, in some of our other work, we show like a matrix where there's some highly accepting and rejecting families doing things that are perceived as positive and at the same time negative. Like, you can have gay friends, you can have them over to the house, but you can't wear that to school because you look like a fag, or what, I'm using that language anyway, with some degree of privilege, right? So this is the sort of troubling news to the family scientists, right? Like, what's the deal with the role of parents? And what this suggests to me is that parents matter. I don't want to say that parents matter, because in all these studies, parents have a strong baseline direct effect. Parent acceptance predicts positive outcomes, parent rejection predicts negative outcomes, but parents themselves don't buffer the bad stuff by themselves. They alone can't buffer peer discrimination that young people experience. But before I do that, I want to maybe question the question and point out, when I made the point earlier about like our, questioning our theories, and as a family scientist, I want to believe that the families, that parents, and well, frankly, as a parent, right, and as a person, as a former LGBTQ young person who wasn't disclosed about, who wasn't out about that at the time, I had parents. Why would we expect parents to have so much power? We wouldn't expect it to be the other way around, frankly. And this is one of the dilemmas for us as family scientists, to kind of like look in the mirror and go, like, really? Like, would we expect peers to buffer against a bad family relationship? Probably not. Like, the relationships in the lives of young people are fundamental and absolutely matter. And so it's a tall order to ask parents to be the buffers for everything that's going on that's like really mean and nasty in the life of any young person, right? So this is the downer part of this talk. Okay, from now on, we're going to go to the upper part, which is the like, what do we do about that? Because this is the like, this is not, for all of you that are parents, this is, I promise there's going to be a save at the end of this talk. Because the answer is not like, there's nothing I can do. It's hopeless. There's nothing I can do to help my kid. Because I think that there's a lot. Because, in fact, this is when it's like, oh yes, Stephen, you're a sociologist, right? There are promising strategies that are really clear that have emerged in the last decade, and really 5 years only, that are showing that we can reduce peer victimization and discrimination and homophobia in schools and in our communities and in our interpersonal relationships. There's really great results on this. And they're coming out of here at Arizona and other places in the country. It's really clear that when young people feel visible and included, when they feel like there are folks who have their back, there's proactive intervention, and when there are policies and programs that are inclusive of them, their schools are most of this research is on schools. Their schools are safer places, they feel more belonging there, they have better academic achievement, and they do well. So let me give you a quick, I'm just going to do a rundown of what that research tells us. Is everybody still with me on this stuff? Okay. I guess it's like I'm not too bad all the time. Oh, hopefully the time. Okay. So in terms of visibility and inclusion, there's some great new research on, for example, high school gay-straight alliances. How many people is there a current gay-straight alliance member in the room? Are there any high school people here? Anybody that was in a gay-straight alliance in their high school? Yes, a couple, yes. You rock. Thank you for being here. Gay-straight alliances are great. And it's not just because they're cool. It's because they are scientifically proven. I'm actually not sort of kidding, but it's probably a little bit of a stretch, scientifically proven to, evidence-based. Okay, that's another story. But gay-straight alliances, there's a number of studies now that are emerging from all across the country using different kinds of methods and different strategies to show that gay-straight alliances in schools influence campus climate and health in positive ways for young people, promoting their well-being, promoting their attachment to school, promoting their achievement. I want to point out that, well, I'll do that in just a minute, having inclusive curriculum, come on in, is linked to school safety and adjustment. So when young people see themselves reflected in the formal text of the schools, when their lives are included in history and English and art and math and science, they feel, they feel better. They feel more connected to their school. They feel safer. They feel like they belong. And one of the strongest predictors of safety is having access to information and support. So this is like really the school resource officer, the brochures in the school, whatever, library, actually having books in the library, frankly, these things actually really do make a difference for young people who are literally trying to see themselves in the text of their school, the literal or cultural text of their schools. And I want to point out that, we're actually next Wednesday, the Crossroads Collaborative has been all about this here at the U of A, about the ways that this is intersectional. All of these things are true around cultural identity as well. So we know that, and this is one of the things that's been maddening about being in Southern Arizona the last few years, because we know this. We know that ethnic studies in high schools makes a difference for achievement, for well-being, for belonging, for attachment. We know that when young people feel like they have access to information support about their cultural identities. We know that the La Raza group matters. We know that the Black Student Union makes kids feel a part of school and connected to school. So this is true for LGBTQ issues. It's true across a number of intersectional issues. Okay, proactive intervention is kind of this next level where this is when teachers have kids' backs, school administrators stand up for and intervene in bullying, and there's the great thing about this, and actually, if you all signed up, I'll make sure that we send out a list when we hosted. This is a tangent. We hosted a year and a half ago here in Tucson an international meeting about LGBTQ issues in schools, and we've got a book coming out from Oxford University Press next spring, which I'm very, very excited. Maybe it'll be summer probably, to be honest, on sexual orientation, gender identity in schools, research, the nexus of research, policy, and practice. And so that book brought together people, truly, we've got contributions from all over the world, from Japan and from Africa and from Europe and from the United States, really trying to understand what works in schools to create positive environments for LGBTQ young people and teachers and parents, everybody, right? But especially the young people. So and what's great is in the last 5 or 10 years, this body of evidence is emerging, and it's really quite new, that we have evidence from students. So when you ask students, they say that having a supportive teacher is one of the most protective factors for them, that they feel safer and they do better when teachers intervene in harassment. That's sort of a no-brainer, right? But actually, it's difficult. And if you talk with educators, for a long time, teachers have said, I don't know that I'm not going to get censored by my principal for intervening. I don't know that if we have this conversation in the classroom, I'm going to get a call from an angry parent. And so empowering teachers and the adults in the school, and the adults in the adult personnel, school personnel, to be there for students isn't a non-trivial issue that teachers will tell you. It's like not actually that easy to do all the time in places that aren't fully supported. We also see some really cool new evidence from teachers that teachers take bias-based bullying more seriously, this is what I was just saying, and are more likely to intervene when they feel that school administrators take it seriously. And this is in a study of all the public schools in New York City. So it's pretty compelling data on whether teachers perceive that their principals are taking LGBT bullying seriously and whether they are themselves intervening in bullying. And then finally, this is the one that is that I spent a lot of time thinking about and trying to advocate for, is policies, because it's like something that those of us who are maybe a little bit far away, who don't necessarily, who don't have, well, I mean, we could all be members of the PTSO, couldn't we? So never mind, I won't say that. I was going to say who aren't parents of school-age students, but we could all go to the PTSO anyway, the Parent Teacher Student Organization, and be advocates. But we've got really good data on policies that matter. So we know from students that if students say that they have a non-discrimination or anti-bullying policy that's inclusive in their school, they feel safer and they're more likely to have higher grades. This is really great data, right? We know from, if we compare across schools, that all schools aren't equal, that there are some schools that are clearly better than others in terms of the LGBT culture. And I want to tell you this is true. It is not as simple as where you live. This is true in the city of San Francisco. There are some schools that do it better, and we've got data on it to show that depending on where you are and the kind of administrative leadership that a school has, there are places where these other kinds of strategies, like having curriculum, feeling like you have resources and support, matter. And so we know that kids who say that they report having resources and support, as the proportion of kids in a school that says they have that kind of support, the frequency of harassment goes down in schools. And then finally, there's a report out from the Gay, Lesbian, Straight Education Network, GLSEN, that shows that if you compare across states in the United States, that students in states that have enumerated laws, meaning laws that are specifically including LGBT protections, report fewer biased remarks and less harassment. And now and I'll just say this for the scientists in the room, that some of you will say, well, what about selection? And aren't some places better to begin with? And isn't Massachusetts? And I would say, look, we're not going to randomly assign children to states or to hostile schools. So, I'm done with that. That's such a silly argument, right? Like, this is really good evidence that these, from multiple kinds of data, multiple levels, that these kinds of strategies work. And so quickly on that point, I do want to point out, we've got 33 states that have school anti-bullying and anti-harassment laws that aren't enumerated. So we've got a lot of work to do in the United States. 12 are enumerated. What does that leave? I can do the math. 5 don't have any laws at all. They decide actually, and in every single case, there's the argument about anti-bullying laws around enumeration of status characteristics has come down to fights about LGBT inclusion, about whether they're going to include the gays in the law or not. We might be willing to talk about race and include that. We might be willing to talk about gender, sex, but we're not going to. That's where the rubber meets the road with these policies. And there are two, and I want to point out, two proposed enumerated U.S. federal laws, the Safe Schools Improvement Act and the Student Non-Discrimination Act. And I should say both of our local Congress people, I should say, with much more respect, Grijalva and Barber are co-sponsors of the House bill, which is terrific. And if you go to govtrack.com, you'll see that the Safe Schools Improvement Act has a predicted 2% likelihood of ever making it out of committee, and the Student Non-Discrimination Act has a 1% likelihood of ever being passed. So we still have a lot of work to do, right? So there are people that are thinking about what we can do in creating laws and policies, and we've got good folks here in Southern Arizona who are working with us, but the prognosis isn't so good, at least at the federal level. And we've got a lot of work, frankly, we got a work to do here in Arizona. We have talk to me, I'll tell you the uncensored version in the lobby about the anti-bullying law in the state of Arizona, right? We have a law that's an administrative law that's about documentation, I would say, rather than, this is probably going to be online somewhere, and I'm going to lose my job. All right, so what is our role in all of this? So it actually works, and I want to take this out of the school environment to say, like, all of us can make a difference, because I really actually believe that we can. So what is our role? Each one of us in this room, multiplied by however many, we're on the top 30 campus, so like each of us times 30, let's just think of that or something. What could we do? And I want to quickly point out the ways that parents can actually matter. So this is a last sort of tangent, which is in another study that we've done that's going to actually come out as part of this book that's going to come out in 2015. We interviewed my colleague Stacy Horn and I. Stacy is at University of Illinois. And some of you remember Ray Moody, who's now like such a superstar at the City University of New York. He's a co-author on this work, and he was great. And some people like that helped in this study. But we interviewed people from states that had passed non-enumerated laws, meaning they argued about anti-bullying laws and did not pass laws that included race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, gender, actual perceived gender expression. And we compared them to people that were active and involved in policy advocacy in states where they passed enumerated laws. And we intentionally, and it's not what you would necessarily think. Like, for example, Massachusetts passed could not agree to include LGBT in their state law. Whereas in North Carolina, they have one of the probably model state laws in North Carolina. So there were some not surprises, like Alabama didn't pass a non-enumerated law. The state of Washington and California passed enumerated laws, but it's not as simple as the coasts, the red states, and the blue states. And so we wanted to get an understanding of that. And what we learned, and this is I'm just here focusing on the discourse around parents. This is there's going to be a whole chapter that is much more complicated. It includes much more about what we learned about policy advocacy in general. But what we heard in the places where the laws were non-enumerated is that parents may have been involved, but it was not consistent. And that the discourse that we heard from everyone we interviewed in those states was that it was just a small group of parents that were advocates, or parent opposition stops everything. We heard either one of the two. It's like either there's just like a tiny little group of parents that was trivial and insignificant in the advocacy, or those angry parents are going to derail everything because they're never going to let us have LGBT inclusion because the conservative parents are going to rise up and prevent this law. We heard really, really different stories, even in North Carolina, when we interviewed people that passed enumerated laws. And what they told us, for those of us who are community organizers, is like, oh yeah, duh. What they told us was that in every case, parents were advocates and were storytellers. Parents were telling their stories in every state and were actively involved and sought to be part of the advocacy process. And that they were described as having a strong coalition of parents with strong voices, and that they worked in coalition in every case across communities of difference to pass anti-bullying laws that were carefully enumerated. And so what we heard is that it wasn't just a few isolated voices, but it was the parents of the LGBT kids, the parents of the kids with disabilities, the parents of the kids who were being discriminated against because of their race and ethnicity, and that there was real traction and work on the ground to bring communities together, communities of difference together that might not see themselves necessarily in the same room all the time, around the importance. And then what happened, and it's a great story in North Carolina actually, because what happened in North Carolina is that the first time around, they had an enumerated law drafted, and they got right to the final hour, and the state legislature took out the enumeration in order to get it passed, and the coalition walked away. The coalition as a group said, this was a principle at the beginning, we're not going to do it. If you don't include enumeration in the law and you don't include every last kid, we're walking away from you, we're going to embarrass you. So that legislator withdrew the actual law, and then a year later it came back and it went forward. So it's like having coalition and being really serious and committed to coalition that mattered for parents. And so I guess one of the things the implications of all of this to me is that I do think bringing it back to young people and coming out, is that for LGBTQ young people, I do think there's a collision between progressive social changes, I'm calling them progressive, you might call them whatever, okay, but between these dramatic social changes toward acceptance and with these human developmental, and you see my asterisk because I'm so nervous about calling anything developmental anymore, even though I'm a developmentalist, but like whether it's, at any rate, between these human developmental processes related to peer understanding and social acceptance. I think we have this collision right now. I think it's actually kind of serious. And I think we see it, and it bubbles up in different ways, and I think if we kind of really understood it in that way, we would have understood in 2009, some of us, when we started hearing a new discourse in schools in Tucson about Born Here, that there was a new kind of bullying that was taking place that I was hearing in Tucson about bullying around being born here or not. And that was new. There maybe had always been bullying around having an accent, or maybe being perceived as not fitting in, or maybe even race, or not being white, or being Latino, or not being Latino, or whatever. But for a new discourse to emerge out of 2009, you know what I'm talking about, as Born Here, as an issue around bullying, is something that suggests that we have this collision, that young people are sensitive to their differences, and we've got to figure out a way to help them understand that and navigate it. Parents matter, but they cannot by themselves buffer the nasty discrimination that happens in the lives of young people, and it's a tall order to expect the parent to. And in fact, it confirms what we knew. If you think about the media stories about all of those terrible stories we heard starting 4 years ago about deaths by suicide by young, frankly, mostly gay men, and actually, frankly, mostly young kids of color. Those stories, almost all the ones that got media attention were the ones where the parents were the advocates. Those stories, think about it, those were not parents who were rejecting of their kids. Those were parents, in every one of those cases, those were parents who were absolutely standing up for their kids. So it doesn't even, our theory that parents are going to somehow magically fix everything doesn't even fit with the anecdotal data from the media. Those parents were saying, I did everything I could, and I still had to send my kid every single day to a hostile place. And it was a tragedy. So parents matter, but they can't fix it all by themselves. So we have to be involved in fixing it. And so there is great evidence that for leading us forward. I mean, there's really strong suggestion about what we can do, and thank you, Jennifer Hopeful, for doing it every single day at the University of Arizona, and all of us too. But I mean, we have to have a shout out for LGBT affairs because it's so great. But we know that visibility inclusion, that proactive intervention, that all of us, when we say, that is so not cool. What did you just say? Wow, I don't like that. And we can talk about strategies if you want at the reception. That I've actually some cool ones that I've learned from young people. And inclusive policies, and all of us can do this, right? All of us should at least, write our Congress critter or whomever and say, this has got to be a priority. We have to have safe schools. We have to have resourced, so let's have resource schools, and let's have safe schools that are inclusive of all young people and all the differences that matter to them, that are fundamental to them. So, to me, the part of the key message is discrimination matters. It is not just as simple as people shouldn't hit each other in the hallway. We've really got to have our schools be places where we interrogate that, where we interrogate structural racism, homophobia, sexism, right? And we can all be part of figuring out the policies and programs that will do that. And so I think this is actually the radical transformation of the family studies parenting researcher guy is to rethink parenting as a collective endeavor, is to think about the role of the parent as being the community advocate, as working all of us together to create the positive climates where everybody can be happy and come out and we can have gay pride every day, right? Okay, so thank you, I'll stop there. I talked a little too long. So, should we do like a question and then we'll go to, or should we just go to the lobby? Should we do questions? And if you gotta go, you gotta go. I totally get it. It's almost 6 o'clock. Hi, Liz. Yeah. Yeah, no, it's a critical question, and it's actually the survey research methods have not caught up with our understanding of gender, sexuality, sexual orientation, identity, and gender nonconformity. So I think you're absolutely right. I mean, you're absolutely right about that as a critical, challenging question about what the data mean. I think that, sort of practically, we did focus, actually I did focus groups in California a long time ago around those data to try, because I was particularly interested in, it's another story around the disability and what it meant to have a disability. But young people are creative with these surveys. I mean, young people say that they will represent themselves how they need to represent themselves. So one of the things we heard about disability was like, I'm overweight, I don't really have a disability, I don't necessarily technically have a disability, but I get bullied because of that, and there was no place on this survey, so that's what I would check if it were me. So I think young people are in other words, I don't think the data are fundamentally flawed. I think that they are just don't represent that level of complexity. And when we have done in other data, actually the data that came out of GSA Network, the research briefs on gender nonconformity and LGBTQ youth of color, we really have a much richer understanding of the ways that gender conformity, I would say even just conformity, but gender conformity is really what's operating for young people. It's a really long and complicated answer, but I think what we learned is that there is some bullying and discrimination that happens around things that young people attribute specifically to LGBT, like holding hands with your same-sex partner, being socially regulated about that when the straight people aren't regulated for holding hands, for example. That is that gender or is that sexual, you know, like what is that? You know, because obviously at some fundamental level it's sex gender. It's like any two people should be able to hold hands regardless of what the gender or sex of that person is. So what I'm saying is I think you're absolutely right that ultimately, I think a lot of I believe, and we're sort of, Shannon Snap in my group is writing about the role of gender nonconformity as kind of the underlying hum that is, I think frankly in many cases toxic in secondary school climates. Sort of what it means to be a man, what it means to be a woman, and how that puts kids who are gender nonconforming or queer or LG or T in a bind. You know, I don't know if that was a long kind of way to say. Well, they literally on the survey they just said, let me see if I can. Yeah, it's a survey of students, and they say if you were bullied, was it because of your sex or gender was the answer, or because you were gay or lesbian or someone thought you were. So it's really that discrete, and we are relying on. I mean, there's a lot of complex social noise that results in a young person ticking that box. You know, so. Another question? Thank you, Liz. Yeah. Yes. Yes, so the question was, can you check multiple categories? And actually another paper that we've shown that, you know, not surprisingly, multiple forms of discriminatory victimization are associated with even more elevated heightened risk for young people. And in fact, you could probably guess from the numbers that it's more typical to have experienced one or maybe more. 2 was 1.5 was the average. You know, most people reported 1 or 2. And it's important that to point out that, you know, all of those were equal opportunity. That like white kids reported racial discriminatory bullying, that straight kids reported LGB bullying. That kids are being socially regulated all the time about these kinds of difference, or that's their perception of it. So. Prill. That is a fantastic question. I don't know. I do not know of anything that's been done. I love that. Students in the room, this can be your next, you know, it's a really great question. Great. This is what I just, thank you. I just love that because it's like you are always solution oriented for us here at the university. Thank you, Prill. And I think that's a great example of like, okay, how could we, that is a great example of how could we activate the grandparent cohort all around Tucson that is waiting to be activated. That's ready to be activated. And I think we could pick a strategy. I mean, maybe we need a community task force that would say, let's focus on policies. Let's get really good policies in every single school district in this community in the next 2 years. Or let's focus on getting teacher training in schools so that we can so we can actually teach teachers, work with teachers, help them teach us too, on what it means, what bullying is. Actually, one of the things we learned in Tucson in another study was that lots of young people say they don't even know what bullying is. There's a discourse of bullying, but no one's ever talked to them about like what it actually is and what it feels like. They know it when it happens to them, but they're not really sure when they're doing it themselves, right? So even just engaging the adult parts of schools in like, we could train teachers, we could try to work on policies, we could try to do individual level support of our grandkids that is so absolutely fundamental and meaningful. every single day. So thank you, Pearl. Always being practical. Okay. That's a great idea. That's a great idea. As a specific constituent, the question was about the principles in specifically. Yeah. Well, this is important because of the research that's not just around LGBT young people, that's really clear that educational administration really matters. That the role of the principal in setting the cultural tone for the school is absolutely fundamental. And that even principals themselves kind of think, it doesn't really matter that much. But it's really clear that there are places where, even notwithstanding having the same policy, having a leader who says, this is how we're going. I don't know if you saw the stuff that happened in Lincoln, Nebraska in the last week. Well, anyway, long story, but the principal in Lincoln stood up for the teachers that were talking about how to provide support for trans identified students, and there was a big backlash about what are the teachers doing these crazy things for gender in schools, and the principal did a press release and put it on their website and said, we're going to do what's right for the students. The old people who are criticizing us may need to come visit our schools now to understand how gender works, and we're going to support our kids. So I think that kind of leadership is what we actually need to see. So I love the idea of figuring out how do we engage principals from all around our community and the country to do that. One more good question, and then or terrific question.
How and if your data, did you compare it to like the socio-political machinations of like Northern Europe versus like Western Europe, and what are the differences between you look at, for instance, Germany? There's a completely different understanding of sexuality, of acceptance, and I'm wondering like, do you see what are the significant differences?
That is so great and so complicated and so much that we don't know. I mean, there's a lot more of this kind of research happening in North America, in the United States and Canada, and not so much in Mexico. But there is some in Europe and in Northern Europe, Northern and Western Europe, the results look very similar to this. Give me your name and I'm going to hook you up with this book that we're working on. I was in Japan last week talking about this stuff, and it feels and looks really, really different in Japan, for example. And I might, so I'm supposed to, but I haven't got it confirmed. I'm supposed to go to Brazil. I mean, this sounds like whatever, me and my fancy travel, but people seem to care about this. I'm supposed to go to Brazil next month, and the issues there have a really different, very much a different flavor that has to do with the intersections of long-standing racialized understandings of sexualities. So that it's almost like, and this, I haven't been there and I've only just had conversations with people, but sort of like even disentangling, understanding LGBT as separate and distinct from racial and cultural identity is just not even possible in the way that I acknowledge in kind of a cultural frame that we use here, even though it's more complicated than anything I've shown. So it's a terrific question. I would love to talk about that. Okay, Wes, this is really the last one in the moment. Yeah. No, I need to know a lot more about that, because I mean, I've read about it. No, we haven't done that. It's a really great question.
Because the grandparents
Yeah.
in those cultures are really setting of acceptance.
Yeah.
There seems to be an intersection between acknowledgement of spirit and
That's great. I would love to. That would be great. That's a great area that we should pursue, and we should do it here, right? I mean, this is the place to do it. So.
schools are doing an amazing job
Yeah.
of helping
That's
and
great.
there's a main
That's great. Thank you.
Feel the same around.
Great. Thank you. Well, let's go in. We've got a reception with food in the lobby, so we'll continue conversation there. Happy Coming Out Week.